A frozen hand scraped at pine planks. Snow drifted in around her bare ankles. The sound came before the dawn did, a slow, dragging rasp against the bottom of the door, like something. The wind shoved the door open before he could. A woman lay curled on his threshold, blue-lipped, her coat stiff with ice, one frostbitten hand still reaching for the latch. Blood was frozen. Stay with me on this one. He dragged her in by the shoulders of that frozen coat. She weighed almost nothing, the way a starved deer weighs almost nothing, all bone and angle under. Minds kept whispering the same low warning they had been whispering all night, and he ignored them, the way a man learns to ignore the woods when there is finally something inside the cabin that needs him more than the woods do. He laid her on the bare hide in front of the stove. What the cold did not. So he worked slow. He pulled off her boots, and the leather was so stiff he had to cut the laces with his skinning knife. Her stockings underneath were soaked black. Her toes were white as candle wax, and two of them, the small ones, had gone the color of old bruise, and he knew, looking at them, wrapped in flannel, not touching. Her face was young. That was the part that struck him first, after the immediate animal panic of keeping her alive had passed. She was young. Not a girl, not anymore, but young the way his own wife had been young, 24. The swelling told him the ring had been on a long time, and the freshness of the cut told him the cold had only just started taking the finger. There was a wound at her temple, an old one, 3 days at least, scabbed and weeping and frozen over again. In the second week of October, and now it was the dead heart of January. Almost 3 months of his own breath, his own footsteps, his own thoughts going round and round inside the four log walls. Forgotten. The man he was now ran a trapline of 47 sets across the north face of the ridge, and he knew every blowdown and every creek bend, and every place the marten liked to den, and that was come back, no matter what he did with the stove and the blankets and the broth. He set water to boil. He sliced thin strips of dried venison into the pot and crushed in a half-handful of dry. He did not yet know what was sewn into the lining of the coat he was about to peel off her. The coat. He came back to the coat. It was a man's coat, far too big for her, the shoulders hanging halfway to her elbows, the hem stiff and dark with what he was almost certain was dried blood, not all of it hers. The wool was old, the cut older still, a coat like that exactly once before, and he did not want to think about where. He pushed the thought down the way. A man pushes a dog off a chair. Not now. There was a living thing on his floor, and he was a trapper, not to use. The eyes underneath were that river ice color he had first seen on the threshold. Only now, in the firelight, he could see a darker ring around the iris, the color of bark after rain. She looked at him. She did not look afraid. That was the strangest thing. A woman alone, a person who had run out of fear 3 days ago and had been running on something colder ever since. Her cracked lips moved. He bent close. She said one word, and the word was please. Then her eyes closed again, and her head starting to crack. He hung the coat on the drying rack by the stove. He spread it wide so the heat could get at the seams. Steam began to rise off the wool in pale ribbons. He turned back to the woman. Free. He set it on the shelf beside the lamp. It was a plain band hand-cut, with 2 letters scratched on the inside, a J and an R, and a date he did not let himself read yet, because there was a buzzing starting at the back of his skull, and he did not want to know, not yet. It ran down her chin and into the wool. He did not mind. He talked to her low, in the voice he used on his sled dog when the dog was hurt, a voice he had not used on another human being in so long he was surprised it still worked. He told her she was all right. He told her she was safe now. Dark was going to have to come through him to get to her. He did not know when he said it that he was making a promise. But the woods knew. The woods always know first. The wind picked up around mid-morning. He heard it before he saw the new snow start. A for good. He almost smiled at that. He had not smiled in a long time, and the muscle of it felt unfamiliar, like a tool he had not picked up in years. Season alone. He did not sleep. He sat. He listened to the storm thicken and the cabin breathe and the woman breathe, and somewhere around noon, when the light through the oilcloth window had gone the color of pewter, she stirred again, and this time she got a whole sentence out. Her pulse was there. It was small, but it was there, and it was beating in the rhythm of a person who has decided, somewhere deep, to live. He told the coat to see how dry it had gotten, and when his palm came down across the left breast, just above where a heart would be, he felt it. a square of something stiffer than wool, a shape sewn between the wool and the lining. He froze. He stood there for a long Wolverine in the set before he gets to the set, that whatever was sewn into that coat was going to change the shape of the rest of his life. He took the coat down. He laid it across the table. He picked up his skinning knife. The blade was thin from 1,000 wettings, and it slid through the old stitches and folded twice, tied with a strip of black ribbon that had gone gray with age. He set it on the table. He stared at it. The wind hit the chimney again. The woman on the bare hide whimpered once in her sleep. He untied the ribbon. He unfolded the oilskin. Inside were two things, and only two. A daguerreotype in a small brass case, the velvet inside worn smooth. And a letter folded into quarters, the paper foxed at the edges, the ink the rusty brown that ink goes when it has waited a long time to be read. He opened the case first. The hinge made a tiny sound, like a finger bone cracking. The image inside was of a man, the way a half-remembered him is familiar. He sat down. He did not remember sitting down. The chair was simply suddenly under him. He held the case closer to the lamp. He looked at the mouth, the set of the jaw, the small notch in the left eyebrow where a scar would lick. He had buried this face. He had buried it himself, 18 winters ago, in the ground behind a chapel 40 miles south of where he sat. He had paid for the marker. He had carved the dates into the pine himself, before the iron one came up from the tree, and he had not come back down the mountain in any meaningful way since. The man in the daguerreotype was the man in that grave, and the woman shivering on his bare hide was wearing that dead man's coat. His hands had begun to shake. He set the case down. That grief, even old grief, played tricks on a man who had been alone too long. He told himself this all the way through the unfolding. Then his eye fell on the first line of the letter, and the line was, "My dearest daughter." And the second, the man had died, and he would carry the rest of it alone. He read the letter. He read it twice. The handwriting was the same handwriting he had seen on a bank draft a long time ago, the same hooked R, the same narrow E. The letter was dated the spring before the man's death, written in case. The writer, Louis. It spoke of a wrong the writer had done to another man, a friend, a partner, a man whose wife had died because of that wrong, and it asked in plain words that if anything ever happened, the child should be told the truth. The truth was this. The writer had let another man's wife die. He had not killed her. He had, the letter said, simply failed to act in time, had a long ride and a closed pass had done the rest. The friend, the partner, had never known. The writer had not had the courage to tell him, not before he died, and so he was telling now the only person he could still tell, his daughter, in a letter she might never read, sewn into a in that hooked R hand was a sound he had not let himself hear inside his own head for 18 years. The man who had written the letter was the man who had hesitated on the trail. The man who had hesitated on the trail. She had come to him out of the storm. She had brought her father's coat back to the only person left alive who would know what was sewn inside it. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. He sat with that knowledge for a long time. The fire burned down. He did not feed it. He listened to her breathing. He listened to the wind. He 2 days, knowing already, in the way a man knows, that he was riding to a grave and not to a sickbed. He had blamed the weather after. He had blamed the doctor in the lower town who had been drunk that morning. He had blamed God briefly, and then he horse with the better chance. His partner had come back 2 days later saying the pass was closed, and the trapper had believed him because his partner had been the kind of man you believed. And his wife by then had been 3 days dead. He looked at the neat in the same plot of frozen ground. The rage did not come. What came instead was a strange, tired thing, almost like pity, almost like recognition. The man who had hesitated on that trail had been a coward. The way a trapper knows whether that his partner had not died of fever. His partner had died of the letter that was now lying on his table. He looked at her again. Her cheek had a little color in it now. The shivering had father had sewn a confession into the lining of a coat she had then, somehow, ended up wearing across a freezing mountain at the wrong end of January with a wound at her. And he was going to have to listen to all of them, because the debt that had been opened that morning 18 winters ago, the debt he had carried alone, the debt he had thought died with his partner, had just walked in out of the snow and laid itself down on his bare hide and asked him, with one cracked word, please. He thought about the trail he had ridden the day his wife died. Like old men listening. He had pushed the horse hard. He had pushed it harder than he had ever pushed a horse, before or since. He had come down out of the pass at last light and found his partner sitting at the table in the lower town, dry, warm, with a half-drunk cup of. The trapper had seen it then, the small wrong shape of the lie, and he had chosen, for reasons he could not name, not to look at it. The lining slid open, the oilskin packet folded neat on the table beside the letter and the case and the wedding band, 4 small objects in a row, the whole shape of his next 20 years arranged in a line on the pine boards. He set the Henry after a long winter of silence, a thing to do. She woke at dusk. The cabin was warm. The storm had thickened into a steady howl. She came back into her body slow, by inches, the way feeling comes back into a frozen foot, painful and surprising. He had built up the fire. He had set fresh broth at her elbow, and a tin cup of water with a little honey stirred in. He had not, the whole long afternoon, opened his mouth to speak. He had been rehearsing. He had been deciding, again and again, at the iron stove, and then she looked at him, sitting in the chair beside her, and a small, careful something moved behind her face. She said her name first. Her name was Hannah. She said she was the for dead in the snow. She said she had crawled back into the house and found her husband already gone, and she had taken what she could carry, and she had walked. She had not at first known where she was walking. She had only known that the man who had killed her husband had said, before he left, that he would come back in the spring to make sure of her, because dead women, he had said, were better neighbors, until she had seen the smoke from his chimney, very small against the gray dawn. She had not chosen his cabin. She had crawled toward the only smoke on the mountain. She did not know whose smoke it was. She paused there. She looked at him a long. The trapper did not answer at once. He let the words sit between them. He looked at her face, at the cheekbones that were her father's cheekbones, at the eyes that were her mother's. He could see that now, river ice and bark after rain, and he thought of the small grave 40 miles south and the smaller grave beside his own cabin, the one with. He thought of the man, somewhere in the storm, who had said who had been his wife. He told her about a closed pass in a wet spring and a fever and a hesitation. He told her about the burial and the marker and the 18 winters. He did not call her father a coward. He did not call him a friend either. He called him simply the man I rode with. She only listened with those river ice eyes, and when he had finished she nodded once, slow, like a person who had suspected for a long time and was only now being told, and she said, "Then I have come to the right cabin." They sat with that, the footing instead, the rounds in the Henry, the cords of wood in the lean-to, the days till the high passes would melt enough for a man on a strong horse to ride up out of the lower country. He was counting the things a man counts when he has decided, without quite saying so, that someone else's spring is going to be his fight. He looked at Hannah. He told her in the snow. He would find a trapper at the door, with a debt to settle and a Henry that did not miss. She closed her eyes. She did not say thank you. He was glad of that. Thank you was too small a word for the thing that had passed between them and the lamp. He picked up the 4 small objects, the case, the letter, the ring, the ribbon. He carried them to the shelf above the bed. He set them in a row where she could see them when she woke. Then he banked the fire one more time and he sat down in his chair, and he watched the door thing instead of the end.